I'm Pia Maria. I'm from Agile People. I'm the founder of Agile People. And today in Stories from Reality, we have a very special guest. We always have special guests, but this one is from far away and has a long experience. And he's going to tell us more about how we can accelerate agility with value-based decisions. And welcome, Yoram Baltinester.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So good to have you here. You're a serial entrepreneur with a successful high-tech career in the Middle East, Europe, and North America, as I understand it. And now you're in San Diego, California. Is that correct?
Indeed, yes.
So would you like to tell a little bit about yourself before we start your presentation?
Well, you know, I either don't say anything about myself or I tell a lot about myself. So you can choose. But okay, you asked for a little bit. So I am what you would call a very non-linear person. So I can tell you that I was born, raised, and educated in Israel. I moved to the US as part of my high-tech career, and I've been in San Diego, California for the last 25 years. Now, before that, the way this all started is I spent about a decade in corporate, in software companies, and then I ended up being between jobs right when September 11 happened. Mm-hmm. And I knew at that point, in fact, I didn't know at that point, but the following day, I met the CTO of the company that wanted to hire me. And he said, yeah, we'd love to hire you. We're just not going to hire you for the foreseeable future. And I realized that if they don't, nobody will. So I kind of went home and with a long face, and my wife asked me, you know, what's going on, what's happening? And I said, you know, I met Rajiv and he said, they're not going to hire me. And, you know, I don't think anyone will in the foreseeable future. And she says, well, you've always been talking about entrepreneurship. Why don't you do something? And so I did. I started an IT services company, started it, grew it, sold it 12 years afterwards. So after being in corporate, I was an entrepreneur. And when I sold it for one reason, and that is I wanted to try what I always had as a passion, which is coaching and teaching and writing and engaging with personal and professional development, which I did. I created a consulting firm called Decisive Action Workshops, and I did a lot of executive coaching, team building, and also as a parallel track, which isn't parallel really, but we're going to go into that in a few moments, I did personal development. Mm-hmm. And then came COVID. And then I said, okay, now I want to do something else. So I've been in the corporate world. I've been an entrepreneur. I've been a coach and a solopreneur. Now I want to wrap everything together, everything that I learned, and go back to corporate. So in the last 2 years, I've been a vice president of support for a large software company, which was a very interesting exercise. Pia Maria, you mentioned about the digital age. So this is a company that has no location at all. Mm-hmm. So we had over 5,000 employees. They were all remote, working from their homes, representing close to 100 countries from every time zone possible. Mm-hmm. And our support team, which I managed, had about 100 representative, again, representing multiple countries, all time zones, all remote, all from home, and providing virtual support 24/7. So that's who I am, and that's my story.
That's great. Fantastic to hear. You've been around a lot and have a lot of experience, and we are dying to hear more about how to make value-based decisions and what you've been working on in regards of that topic. So please go ahead, Yoram, and tell us more about that.
Okay, so the way we're going to do this is I'm going to present a few ideas over the next few moments. And if you have questions, please do put them in the chat. I like to see that more as a conversation than as a presentation. But for the beginning of it, I'll just offer a couple of ideas and then we'll go from there and we'll see whatever comes up. So here's the thing about agility and agile teams. And agility is not something new. Agility has always been around us. I remember myself growing up, and I always had at the back of my mind the questions of how to make great decisions. And agility is all about making good decisions, reading a situation, making a decision, and implement it, and doing it quickly. And doing it quickly to respond to what's going on in front of you, right? And you can see it everywhere. You can see it in personal life. You can see it in your teamwork at work. You can see it on a global level. And so the premise of Agile Team is that agility could become your competitive advantage, right? You work faster, you respond faster to situation there than your competition, then you're going to do better. So, okay. So that means that we can be more agile or less agile. It's not a binary situation. You're either agile or you're not. So agility has a scope to it. And so how can we be faster? Okay, well, if we want to go there, we need to understand the very thing that's called agility. So if I'm going to move so you can see it. If we say agility is the ability to look at the situation and understand and move quickly about it, then the question becomes really, how do you make good decision quickly? Because everybody can make a quick decision. It's just not always going to be good, right? When we are under pressure, what happens, right? When the pressure goes up, what happens to intelligence? Intelligence goes down because we're under pressure, right? So when intelligence goes down, we tend to make decisions that we later call them hasty decisions, stressful decisions, and the decision is not as good as it can be. So the question becomes, how can we still make a good decision when the pressure goes up? And that's where suggestion number one comes in. And I think that I can base it by saying that the more we base our decisions on our values, the better they are. So what does that mean, right? So value, by definition, our value is our principles, our standards of behavior, right? So whatever we think is a good value, whatever we decide that this is the value according to which we want to live our life, that becomes a standard of behavior, and these are our values, right? So I'm going to share with you my values, and as I share with you my values, I invite you to put some of yours in the chat box, right? So here are some of my values, right? So I have 6 of them and I have more that I appreciate, but these 6 are my top priority. These 6 values I've taken and I said, by definition and by decision, this is going to be the guiding principles that guide my life, which means the way I make decisions, which means whatever I do. And that could be at work, at home, in my health life, in my spiritual life, all of that. So what I've chosen, so to speak, some of them we don't quite have a choice, but different topic. So one of them is self-expression, right? So self-expression is a top value for me. I mean, everybody has gifts. We all know that. I believe that our gifts are God-given, and they were given for a reason. And so it's incumbent upon me or us to express them. So that's the self-expression, right? I believe in creativity. I believe that education is a top level, and education for me means both learning and teaching, right? Leadership to me is allowing others to self-express themselves. Now that's starting to be interesting now that there's a team, right? So suddenly if you or if I manage 100 people and everybody wants to self-express, it could become interesting, right? Loyalty. I have your back. If you're on my team, I have your back, period. If I'm working for a company, I'm loyal to the company. If I'm part of a family or a team, I'm loyal to that team. And then unity. It's just a choice of mine. I believe that we're all inseparably interconnected as humans, right? So these are the 6. And I think it is important for everybody to realize / choose their own and state it for themselves. Just have it written somewhere, right? Have it in your mind, but have it in such a way that when somebody goes and says, okay, so what are your top value, you can spit it out because you know. And why is it important? So it is important because it helps us make good decision. Now, what's a good decision? Now, here's the thing. When I ask in the programs that I lead or online or just if somebody else, I see it a lot. You ask somebody, what makes a decision good? And they go, well, tell me what happened afterwards. Well, that's great, but that's very unuseful. Because at the point that you need to make a decision, you don't know what's going to happen afterwards. So deciding that a decision is good in retrospect, I'm not saying that it's invalid, I'm just saying it's unuseful. And I have here suggestion number 2, which says a good decision, a decision being good is based on how you make it. What does that mean? So for me, it means if you make your decisions based on your values, these are good decisions. If you make them against your values, these are bad decisions. And I can scientifically prove it. So I have a scientific chart here. And here's my scientific chart. And look at this. When you make a decision on the upper line, right, that is made with your values and the result is good, everything's good, everything's happy, right? And you have a smiley face. Now, what happens is you can make a decision based on your values and the result isn't going to work. It's a bad result. There is still something there reassuring that I stay true to my principles. And I'll figure out the bad result. And life goes on. But what happens when we make a decision that's against our values? If the result is good, so we go, But how many times do we hear people saying, when you push them, well, I'm not proud of what I did, but it came out right. Right? That's typical when we make a decision that's against our values. But here's the kicker. When we make a decision against our values, and the result is bad. That's the only combination. That's the only time where we go, I knew it. I knew I should have done the other thing. I knew I should have taken the other decision. So when you look at it, it becomes pretty clear that good decisions are the ones you make with your values. Okay, so if good decisions are made with your values, then, okay, so what next? So how do we actually put that to action? Right? And I want to stress the disconnect, because if I would ask you to raise your hand every time, if you ever went into an office or a corporate building or a company, and there was a big plaque with, here are our values, or you went to a website and you went to the about page of a company and they say, these are our values. Yeah, okay, but what does that actually mean in action? How does that get used? How does that transpire in action? And that's where people start stopping, because they don't have quite that answer. But the point that I want to make is, beyond that, values are 100% more important, because they are the backbone of the commercial success of every company. They are the backbone of your team's success, whichever part of the organization you're in. Let me give you an example of why I think that way in terms of the company itself, right? So when you have values, the way you work them is you actually take them and you use them to state a principle of behavior or a code of excellence, or what sometimes we call a code of honor. This is how we do things. Now, when we are consistent about doing things in a certain way, then what we create is a culture. Because think about it, culture, the rough definition that I have for culture is how we do things around here, right? So the American culture is how things are being done in America. The Swedish culture is how things are being done in Sweden. The, whatever. The corporate culture is how things are being done in your corporation. The family culture is how things are done in the family, right? So you create a corporate structure. And if that is persistent enough and you have corporate structure and it's consistent over time, what you get is a customer experience. Because what do customers experience? They experience how you do things. Well, we said that's culture. So, okay, so a consistent culture becomes customer experience. And if your customer experience is consistent, what do you get? A reputation. This is the company that does things like this. And a reputation can be leveraged for market share if it's a good reputation, of course. And if it's a bad reputation, then you're in trouble. And at least you know that, right? So the operative part here is that when you use values, it can ruin your company or it can build your company. So the question, though, when it comes to decisions, because I want to stay in context, right? So the question is, how do we accelerate agility? How do we make decisions faster that are still going to be good? And we said, okay, let's use values. And how do we use values? Well, the answer is right here in the second row. Because when you take your values and you say, this is how I'm going to express the values, this is how our team is going to do business, this is how our company is going to do business, then you just transformed words like leadership and creativity and honesty and transparency and inclusion And whatever it is that is the value in your team and your company, you transform them into principles of action. They sound like sentences. They sound like expressions of how we do things. I lead by example. We don't leave teammates in trouble. Everyone sells. These are examples of principles of action that they don't come out of nowhere, they come out of value, even if the values aren't stated, right? So now we have what I call principles of behavior, or maybe code of excellence. So now the question becomes, how do you apply that to situations? The thing is that when you decide, when you have a list of maybe 10, 15, 20 is a lot. I've seen 20, but 20 is a lot. Principles of how we do things, then decisions become easier because there is a guiding line. It's like having a constitution, and then, you know, whatever you decide the law is, it has to sit inside of the context of the constitution. It has to agree with the basic laws, right? The hard part about it is getting used to it. The hard part about it is practicing it. And the hard part about it is sometimes you have questions that are becoming really difficult to decide. And what happens when a question is difficult is you slow down. And when you slow down, you lose your agility. Game lost. So we don't want to do that. So what I've developed over the years, and it's not a big invention, it's just a template that I used with the people that I worked with to say, okay, well, this is going to be helpful in making your decision. And I call it the Decisive Action Protocol. And it's a 4-question protocol, simple sequence. And it goes, okay, remind me, what are your team values / personal values / corporate values? Remind me, what are your values again? And what is your code of excellence or principles of action, right? That shouldn't be any question. That is something that you already have because you worked it out, you know what it is. You're just reminding yourself. The reason why you want to remind yourself that is a little cognitive trick, right? Because what happens when stress goes up, intelligence goes down. Well, how does intelligence goes down? In the extreme case, intelligence goes down by taking your prefrontal cortex offline and going into the lizard brain and going into a fight or flight mode, right? When you ask yourself a high-level questions like, what are your values? Then you reboot your prefrontal cortex. You're kind of in charge again. You know that you need to take a decision quickly, but at least you kind of reset the system and you can start thinking. The real heart of the protocol is number 3. You want to be able to state your decision that needs to be made in 12 words or less. 12 is not a magic number. If 10 works better for you, switch it. If 15 works better for you, I wouldn't encourage, by switch it. But what I'm trying to say, number 3, is in a few words, because as you know, the longer the question is, the more convoluted it is, the more difficult it is. When you make it a short statement, should I do this or this? It shouldn't be more than maybe a dozen words. That's it. That's the bigger trick, is how to phrase your decision short. And then when you do that, then most times you immediately have your answer, because your values and your code of excellence is like staring you in the face And by the time you are clearly stating what the decision is, you already know the answer. So now one of two things happened. Either I lost you all and you're just politely sitting through it, enduring me blabbering, or it was crystal clear. But either way, what I'd like to do is say something to the effect of, that's it, that's all. Any questions?
Yes, I actually have a question. And I find it, of course, we should make value-based decisions, but the difficult thing happens when people hold different personal values, right? And they clash. There is a conflict in values. That's when most conflicts, that's where conflicts come from, where they arise from. It's a difference in personal values. So what's your take on that? How do we handle that in organizations? We have so many people, we have so different values. Okay, we can have organizational values, but then the people we have, they don't always like our organizational values necessarily, or have the same personal values. So there is a gap in values all the time. How do we handle that?
Okay. May I have your permission to be rude?
Yes.
Okay. So this was a great demonstration of what happens in number 3 when you have a very long question. Why? And I'll answer the question, but you had like 3 or 4 different questions then.
Yeah.
There.
But we nail it down to gap in values. Okay, yes. That's 3 words. Okay.
Yes.
How do you handle gap in values?
Okay. So here's the thing. I always used to warn organizations where they invited me to do this training. And I said, look, I would like to warn you before I start that was the manager that brought me in. I'd say, some people may leave. Some people may leave. So in the rudest form that I'm not a rude person, but in the rudest form that I can, I'd say, okay, if a person doesn't agree with the organizational principles and values, why are they working there?
Because they have probably been recruited and have the desired competence, and the HR did not recruit on values. There is not values-based recruitment happening in the company.
Okay, but that's in the past. Now their decision is, should I stay or leave?
Yeah.
12 words or less, right? Should I stay or leave? And believe me, I understand. Give you an example. I was sitting in a conference where I was part of a multi-level marketing organization at the time. So this was a leadership conference, and I had a bunch of people from my team. I have the company where they just put me that morning on the leadership advisory board for the company and all of that. And I'm sitting there. And I was making a lot of money. And they are pitching an offer from stage, and I'm listening to it, and my mind goes, that's total nonsense. Not only does it not work technically, but this is like way overinflated. You know, they're asking people to put $10,000 each into something that I wouldn't pay $50 for, right? Now, remember, I have my own, of my values is loyalty, right? So single value. Now, which one is it? Loyalty to the company or loyalty to the people in my team? It's a tough question. It ended up being loyalty to the people in my team. Now, I also knew, because I knew the people who ran that company, that speaking up would not be good to my status in the company. And I ended up getting in trouble. I ended up speaking up. I ended up probably killing their sales pitch. They came in way under what they wanted to see as their sales revenue from that session. I got fired. But I can tell you in retrospect, and I had a rather tough time afterwards, because I had to find an alternative source of income, like immediately. I can tell you in retrospect that the people who were on my team, remember, even if you didn't experience being a part of an MLM, you surely experienced being pitched to be a part of an MLM, right? So people are investing money to be part of my team. I convinced people to invest money, and part of the pitch that I had to them is, I have your back. I'm going to make sure that this is going to work for you. I would have looked like the guy in the lower left-hand corner if I didn't say anything. I would have made some money, but I wouldn't have been proud of myself. I would probably lose some friendships. Was against my values. Right? So the people who are in the company and they don't agree with the company's values should find the nearest emergency exit. Now, I want to tell you, especially if there's anyone listening to this who is in that situation, the nearest emergency exit doesn't mean you go tomorrow and you resign. It means that you make a plan to resign as soon as you can when you find an alternative source of income, and you don't just kill your finances over the principle. You just do it smartly, as fast as you can, but not being suicidal, right? So that's the first thing. The more interesting thing is what happens when you own a team and you have people in the team that have different opinions about things, right? So the world, as we all know, it becomes more and more extreme, right? Politics become extreme, countries become extreme, people become extreme. Families get broken over which political party somebody belongs to. It's crazy. Really? Just as I said, I'm going to be rude and ask, why is this person still working there? I'm going to still be rude and say, why are these people working here? Who hired them? Who was the hiring manager? Now, you weren't always the hiring manager, even if it is your team, right? But I heard a conversation with another vice president of support just a couple of weeks ago, and he said, I have a support team of 300 people. And he has, after everything is said and done, I added another question to the evaluation of everybody doing hiring. So does this person have the capacity? Do they know what they're doing? Can they do the job? Do you like them? Would you want to have lunch with that person? He says, in all the hiring that we've done in this team, nothing would ever get me to leave aside the cultural fit to the team. The cultural and the fit to the team is more important than anything else, because then Everybody knows that everybody has everybody's back. They act as a team, and differences of opinions and differences of values are not going to jump at you in the very wrong moment. Because when do you see the values differences? At the exact wrong moment, when you need everybody to be on the same page. So it's on us as managers, it's on us as team leaders. We need to make sure that the team is built in such a way that it'll hold under pressure. Holding under pressure gets created by creating a team that has the same values, but more than that, creating a team that has the same code of ethics, the same code of honor, the same code of excellence. In fact, I'm gonna recommend a book. Some of you might have known it's an old book. It's not by me. It's by a guy called Blair Singer, and a longtime friend and a mentor of mine. It's called Team Code of Honor, and it's a short read, excellent book. But that's how you get it. Is you need to have, you want to have a team that you can count with your life on, a team that you can go to battle with. Does that make sense?
Strong teams with same values is the secret. That's what you say. Very strong team who share values. It's a bit difficult when you need diversity as well, because you can have diverse values, and it's valuable to have diverse values. That's what diversity is all about. It's not always about how we look, right? It's also about what we think and what we value. So that's the cognitive diversity. What are your needs? What are your basic needs? But I find it's a challenge to build a very strong team if you also want to not just have, you know, personal chemistry and everybody thinks the same thing, but also have some differences and handle those conflicts in a healthy way. And I think that
differences is power.
Yeah.
Differences is power. The point is, where do you see the clashes, right? Because I've never seen differences being a problem unless they're immediately opposite each other, right? But you bring up a good point, and there's something that both I promised you and now I forgot to do it.
What was that?
And that is, you know, I don't believe in work-life balance.
No.
Right?
I
don't, right? And I don't believe that one should override the other.
No.
But here's what I do believe. I believe that work has to work inside of life and not the other way around. Life doesn't have to work inside of work. So, you know, I count 6 areas of life. Other people count 4 or 10 or whatever, but I count career, finance, relationships, environment, health, and spiritual, right? 6 various areas. Each one of them is on equal footing. But the way that the reason why I say your career needs to work inside your life, and when it comes to values, the values of your life, your personal values, are the container, they're the contextual wrapper around everything, right? Everything inside your life, if it doesn't agree with your values, you don't feel well about it. Okay, now work, your career is inside your life. And that's why I said, if you work for a company where they believe in stuff that you disagree with, then go work for another company. Now, you can bring, it's a huge topic, and I can talk about it forever. But there are values that are critical values, that are non-negotiable values. And if you are inside of a team that operates in a way that disagrees with your non-negotiable values, you're going to either be miserable or you're going to leave very fast. It's one of the two, right? Now, when you have people that think differently, that's great. If there are people who, you're probably all aware of the disagreements that are happening in the US now, right? So there are people who are pro-abortion, there are people who are against abortion. Okay, that does not have to impact their work inside of a, let's say, software company. That is not in their way of writing code. Now, if they're going to work in the, in a hospital where this becomes a part of their work and it interferes with the context, then you have a problem, right? And so when you have a family planning clinic, then you probably want to have there a team that all believes in choice and whatever they need to believe in order to work there and not have the internal conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many values and there's so many nuances that there is, I'd say, 95% of things that you can disagree on very healthily and still be part of the same team.
Yeah.
The agreements has to occur on things that are the team value. And so the team value, which is important, right? Because a few weeks back, you had my friend Avi Shai here, and he comes out of Google. He had a team of 500 people, but Google were 10,000 people, right? So the values of your team have to agree with the values of the corporate, because it's the same principle, because otherwise it's just not going to work. But
Yes.
everything that happens inside of that team has to agree with your personal values, because otherwise you're going to find yourself in trouble.
Yeah. We have some questions in the chat.
Yes.
Would you like to elaborate on those? We have one here. It says, how about data-driven decisions based on complex data? How do you see that?
Where is the problem? Okay, so here's so Javier,
should we invite the person who asked the question?
I would love to, because
so
Xavier.
So, hi.
hello.
Hello. So just wondering, when you have complex complex database, let's say, and you have to make a simple decision, how about that? How do we harmonize your premise of some kind of simple values, simple rule of values towards complex database decisions? More or less, is that clear?
So yes, but I think that the answer is in your question, right? Because the data can be complex, and you want to be data driven. That's a premise in my world, right? You want to be data driven. You want to base your decisions on reality, right? You want to get good feedback from people. You want to get everyone's opinion if the situation calls for that, and you want to have all the data and you want to analyze the data. And at the end of your analysis, that is where you need to make that decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so one of two questions or one of two situations arise. Either by the time you took all your data and you analyzed it, there is no more a decision to make, or there is a decision to make, slash the decision was made by the data and it disagrees with your values, right? Because that's when we're starting to have a hard time with it. So I'll give you an example. We put in a system halfway through my tenure with the last company where I was heading support, right? So we put in a system that would limit the time that the support agent can deal with a ticket. So half hour. If you're not done with in a half hour, then the ticket is taken away from you, literally. It's like, time's up, you're done, right? And the reason behind it was we wanted to increase productivity. The problem with increasing productivity is we would drop quality. Why we would drop quality? Because part of the reason, or part of the way that we measured quality, was in the percent of the tickets that get resolved on the first contact with the customer, right? So FCR versus productivity was quality versus productivity. Now, the data showed that, and later we even played around with 15 minutes limits, right? It's a whole different story about quality. So the data show that we can actually decrease time to resolution, which basically means we decrease average cost of resolved ticket, by putting in the half-hour limit, right? The question was, what about FCR? And the reason why it was a big question is because, of course, the team in support had the value of we have the customer's back. We're doing the best we can for the customer. Well, is it the best if halfway through working on a ticket, I'm pulling it away from the agent and giving it to another agent, right? We decided to implement it, but regardless of the fact that we decided to implement it, my first answer to your question is yes, you're going to do all your analysis, and at the end of analysis, either you already answered because the analysis did it, or you have a simple question, like you said, a very simple question, do this or do this, or you have an answer and you don't like the answer. Now, if you don't like the answer, that's a point where you need to be creative and find a different way to do it. But the analysis just shows you the scenario. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Does that answer your question?
Just to maybe to point out one thought, for me, would you agree that it's also about framing your point to your code of excellence towards that framework of complex data? So maybe if you clarified the code of excellence, maybe you can have a framework for faster decisions in such a complex scenario, I would mean.
Right. So the question becomes at some point is, okay, so how do you do that, right? How do you actually take a list of values that we said we're going to all agree on? You know, we said leadership and we said excellence and we said whatever we said, how do you translate it into a code of conduct or a code of excellence? And it's an exercise, right? It's like many people approach this from in many ways, but it's a team building exercise. It sits inside of the context called team building, and there's multiple exercises to do that. And I can offer you one, and Pia Maria can offer you one, and I'm sure there are other people here that can offer you one. But that's the idea. It's typically, it shouldn't take more than a half a day.
Thank you. Thanks.
Absolutely.
We have, I think there's slightly different question here as well. Somebody wants to know, what happens when organizational values are in place but not actioned on? People are not sticking to the values. Maybe that, and this is my kind of personal thought around it, that there is a structure in place that is talking a different language, if you see what I mean. The structure would lead to another value, but you're forced to work according to that process or whatever structure we're talking about, an approval process or something, and it's more or less impossible to work according to the values.
I'm sorry, I lost signal then, so I completely ducked out. I'm back in now, but apologies. It seems like you're answering my question,
Yes,
but apologies.
you were the one asking this question. Would you like to elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yes, I think we've probably all worked in organizations where the values are on the wall, right? Yeah. Your organization prints them off on a nice picture and it's framed and it's on the wall in every boardroom. But how do you navigate a situation where your operating environment is such that for whatever reason, the organization, and I appreciate that the people are the organization, but when the organization isn't living those values on a day-to-day basis, so the behaviors that you've sort of agreed to establish, or the values and the principles, but they're not being lived in action, how do you manage that?
I think this is a very, very common problem. What are your thoughts on that?
Three thoughts. I'll start from being extreme and then I'll go towards being what some people might call more realistic, right? So being extreme, one of the things that I love about situation painted in black and white colors is that it makes the point, right? So if I if I get married and I make some promises and I don't live up to my word, what do you do? Right? So the answer is maybe not simple, but the answer is kind of clear in that situation. In an organization, now here's the thing with the organization, it has to be top down. Somebody put these values on the wall. And no plaque that I know has been put on the wall without the blessing of top management, because they cost $2,000 to create. But I'm joking about that, but they all know about it. And so somebody over there didn't do a complete job of it. And the incompleteness would be typically, number one, they did a great exercise and they agreed on value, but they have no idea how that shows up in action because they did not translate it into a code of conduct. That would be number one. Number two is they did, but they are ignoring it. That's a tough situation. That's a tough situation. And when I lead events or exercises where we do that, I try hard to make sure that one of the items in the list is saying something to the effect of, I will call whoever I need to call on it when things are being done that are not in accordance to our code of excellence. I'm willing to call people on it because it's confrontational, and I'm willing to be called on it when I do things that are against the code of excellence. Now, that is tough. That creates tension. But when you look at championship teams, and it doesn't matter, you can look at sports, you can look in, special ops in the military, you can look at really, really good corporate teams. They're standing on the foundation of their principles, and they're calling each other, and they're holding each other accountable. And I agree. It's way too frequent that we see organizations where this is not being done. But here's where you can do it. You can do it from where you are downwards in your team. Are you going to have to fight management on behalf of your team? Maybe. Not the first time it's happened. I'm sure everybody here who has a team had to go to bat for their teams. And that's just about all the scenarios that I see around it. Does that cover your question, though?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. And I think if it was to summarize the response, it's to have those values and principles codified, but then to have a strategy or a safety net where when those values and principles aren't being actioned and lived and executed, you have a process that you can rely upon in order to draw a light on that and address it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you.
You are very welcome. It's just like nowhere during this hour did I say leadership was easy. Leadership is going to be demanding, but it's fun, and I love it, and I wouldn't trade it.
Okay, so we have only 3 minutes left, so we need to wrap up, Yoram. I thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for answering the questions. Do we have any more or last questions, Daniel, that we could answer very quickly? You are muted.
If there are questions, you can definitely. I promise to answer any question you're going to ask me. You can ask me by email or through Pia Maria or however.
That's perfect.
Yeah, we had one more question. Then that was run an example, but I think you did that when it came, so we don't need to address that one.
We had an example that you
Yes.
told us about. And I agree very much on your approach when it comes to value-based decisions, and the importance of values is just that companies don't always give all the conditions in their organizational system to live the values, because they have limiting structures that are in the way many times. And
yeah, so I would just like to leave everybody with this thought. I know we are in a context of business, but everything I've said today works for personal life as well.
Yeah. Very, very wise. Good values are good wherever you are in your life. So thank you everybody for attending, and thank you, Yoram, for this great talk and answering our questions. We see you next time. And I hope, Yoram, you also will come and listen maybe next time as a participant. And we are recording this session, so the recording will also be available in our YouTube channel, the Agile People YouTube channel. We'll let you.
Pia Maria, I make no promises because it's 1 a.m. right now.
Remember that.
I will go back and listen to the recordings for sure.
So I wish you a very good night, Yoram, and the rest of you, I wish you a good day ahead. So
thanks, everybody.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.